Hi, my name is Taylor Silverduke, registered dietitian specialized in celiac disease with over 10 years lived experience with celiac disease, and I'm here to talk to you about what to do when you've been glutened. Because let's be real, getting gluten sucks, and there's over 300 plus reported symptoms for both getting gluten for celiac disease or if you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So let's dive into what the symptoms are and what to do about getting glutened, whether you have celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So there are two ways to get glutened. Either you eat full-bone gluten, maybe you had a pizza that was supposed to be gluten-free, but it was actually full of gluten, or you can get gluten through what's known as cross-contact. And cross-contact is very different from cross-contamination. I won't dive too deep into the differences between the two, but cross-contamination refers to the contamination of food through biological components. So this is more talking about foodborne illness, cutting raw meat on the same cutting board that you cut raw fruits and vegetables on. And cross-contact refers to the transfer of allergenic proteins to foods that would not normally contain those allergenic proteins. So this is where with celiac disease, cross-contact can cause gluten exposure if something is gluten-free, but somehow came into contact with gluten-containing proteins. So there are two ways in summary to get glutened, either eating something that has gluten or eating something that has come into cross contact with gluten. Now that we've talked about those two ways that you can get glutened, I want to talk a little bit about what plays into the severity of your gluten exposure reaction. Let me know if you want me to do a deep dive on this topic too. I can talk all about what plays into your gluten exposure reaction, but in general, the amount of gluten you consume, the last time you were glutened, and how far you are in your healing journey, how stressed you are, how well nourished you are, how well hydrated you are, all of those things play into how severely you're going to react to the gluten exposure. And just like there are a variety of different factors that play into how strongly you react, there are also a variety of symptoms that people experience when they're exposed to gluten. In fact, BeyondCeliac.org reports that there are over 300 plus reported symptoms of gluten exposure for celiac disease, and that also applies to non-celiac gluten sensitivity. The main difference between the two being that with celiac disease, there is that characteristic intestinal damage. Non-celiac sensitivity, there is not. So some of those 300 symptoms include digestive upset, diarrhea, constipation, headaches, mental fog, depression, anxiety, joint pain, headaches, and more. So what can you do when you've been exposed to gluten? First and foremost, don't beat yourself up about it. And I know that's hard to do because you've been working so hard to stay gluten-free. You've been working so hard to educate yourself and keep yourself safe. And I know it's a huge blow when you're exposed to gluten. And it's a huge kind of almost slap in the face to all of the effort that you've been putting into your care. But I want to offer you two thoughts on being kind to yourself in this instance. The first thought is you have your entire life to master living gluten-free for celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And yes, the sooner the better, but one gluten exposure is not going to be the end of your healing journey and certainly not the end of your celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitive life. Mistakes happen, which leads me into my second thought, which is no one is perfect. We live in a world where gluten is central to our food system. So you are bound to make mistakes simply because our food system was not built for you. So try to be gentle with yourself. And if you're struggling with that, try asking yourself, how can I be kind to myself in this moment? And like this video if you are going to resolve to be kinder to yourself when you're exposed to gluten, because it happens to the best of us. And it is unrealistic to think that you're never going to be exposed to gluten in this very gluten-filled world. All of that being said, I want to walk you through how I guide my clients to managing gluten exposure and glutening symptoms. And I do this by guiding them through building a gluten exposure kit. Your gluten exposure kit is going to be a shelf, a box, a bag of things that are going to help you self-soothe when you've been exposed to gluten. How I walk my clients through building this kit is we first start off with writing out all of the symptoms they get when they're exposed to gluten. Now, if you're newly diagnosed or you're still unsure about your gluten exposure symptoms, that's totally fine. It really does take a minute for you to understand how your body reacts to gluten exposure and to different stressful food events, etc. So what you can do if you're not sure is just to start a journal and start making a list of how you react to gluten when you are unfortunately glutened, and you can build this kit from there. Otherwise, we're going to take all of the symptoms that you've listed that you know that you get when you've been glutened, and you're going to start listing things for each symptom that can help you feel better or help comfort you. So for example, if you have bloating, maybe in your kit you include peppermint tea, maybe you set aside some really comfy baggy clothes for you to wear when you're bloated, maybe you find relief from having a heating pad on your stomach. and you set aside a heating pad for that. Whatever helps you feel better with bloating is what you would be putting in your kit, and you would start doing this for every single symptom that you experience when you've been glutened. And not only do you build this kit, but you also build a self-care plan for when you've been glutened. So you have this place where you can go to access all of the things that can help you self-soothe, and then you have a care plan that walks you through how to take care of yourself when you've been glutened. Because sometimes it's really hard to take care of ourselves when we don't feel good emotionally, physically, and mentally. All of that being said, I want to wrap up with talking about two controversial subjects when it comes to gluten exposure and managing those symptoms. Those being activated charcoal and gluten digestive enzymes. So if you ever ask what to do when you've been glutened in a Facebook group, you're gonna get a ton of comments, usually saying, take activated charcoal. Now, here's the thing. The logic is they use activated charcoal when you're in a hospital if you've overdosed on drugs or you've had taken some kind of toxic element, and what activated charcoal does is it binds to those things and flushes them out so you don't get as sick. And so the logic is that activated charcoal will bind to gluten and flush it out. However, there is no clinical research to prove and show that activated charcoal actually binds to gluten. That's not how it works. And there is no clinical research to show that this prevents damage or reduces symptoms with celiac disease. What the research does show is that activated charcoal actually impacts the ability of certain medications to take effect. So it can render some of the medications you might be taking ineffective. Medications like birth control. So be super, super cautious when you're choosing and taking any supplement, and always be sure to talk to your doctor about the appropriateness of them, because supplements are not harmless. If anything, they can be harmful. So be careful about what you're taking. And that takes us into gluten digestive enzymes. Gluten digestive enzymes are said to help ease gluten exposure symptoms for non-celiac gluten sensitivity. However, we have no clinical evidence to prove that it is helpful for celiac. So it could be helpful for non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but if you have celiac disease, we do not have clinical evidence to prove that it reduces symptoms or reduces small intestinal damage. So it's really important that you're aware of that, and you know that both activated charcoal and gluten digestive enzymes do not have any clinical proven benefits for celiac disease. However, that's not to say that if you've taken these things when you've been exposed to gluten that they didn't do anything for you. They might have. I'm just trying to present the risks and benefits, and right now we just don't have the research to suggest that these are beneficial for celiac disease specifically. All of that said, I want to say that if you've been glutened, I am holding space for you, and I want you to know that I know how hard it is, and it's okay. It's going to be okay. You did not undo all of your healing from one gluten exposure. You did not ruin your entire gluten-free journey from one gluten exposure. I want you to know that if you've been glutened, I'm holding space for you and your pain. It's never easy getting knocked off your feet by gluten, especially when you've been doing your best to keep yourself safe. I know it's hard, and I want you to know I see you. I also want to say that I am a celiac registered dietitian, and I am accepting clients. So if you do need help with managing a gluten-free lifestyle and keeping yourself safe, I would love to chat. I would love to talk. There'll also be a link down below if you want to talk about working with me. All of that said, I hope that if you've been exposed to gluten that you're able to find some relief, some kind of self-soothing technique in this video to help you feel a little bit better. My name is Taylor Silverduke, registered dietitian specialized in celiac disease. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more information from a celiac nutrition expert, and I will see you in the next video.